You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 6th of August 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS.
Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, we begin the programme with analysis of the situation in the Middle East, where the region is on a knife edge. Then,
so these jets are going to be useful. They are not going to be game changers, but they are going to help. Anything that Ukraine gets at this point is going to help it better defend against Russia's invasion. And so, these are a positive development.
We'll hear all about the F-16 fighter jets that have been finally deployed to Ukraine. We'll find out what's next for Bangladesh following the shock resignation of the Prime Minister. In economic news, we'll discuss the aftershocks of a massive carry trade that's reverberated through global financial markets. We'll rustle through the papers, plus
I think we've tried to find pieces that are vibrant, that have a message. Some pieces have a strong message but are not so easy or beautiful to look at, so we try to find a combination.
We'll learn about a new addition to the London art scene. And finally, we'll cross to the City of Lights to preview our Paris Olympics coverage today. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has narrowed her search for a vice presidential running mate to two finalists, Governors Tim Walz of Minnesota and Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, and is expected to announce her choice today. Venezuela is launching a criminal probe against the opposition leaders contesting last month's election for inciting police and military officials to break the law. And last night, protests in Britain continued, mostly involving a few hundred people, with shops looted and mosques and Asian-owned businesses attacked. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, US President Joe Biden held round-the-clock crisis talks on Monday amid fears of an imminent retaliation from Iran that could bring the Middle East to the brink of an all-out regional war. Iran's foreign ministry says Iran believes it needs to punish Israel to prevent further instability in the Middle East after the deaths of Hamas and Hezbollah leaders last week. Meanwhile, at least 5 US personnel were injured in an attack against a military base in Iraq yesterday. Well, I'm joined now by Nimrod Goran, who is a senior fellow for Israeli affairs at the Middle East Institute and the founder of the Israeli foreign policy think tank Mitvim. Nimrod, it's very good to have you back with us. What do we know about that attack on US personnel in Iraq?
Good morning. We don't know much yet, but we know that Iranian-backed militias are acting from Iraq against US targets. It's not for the first time. Now it happens within the context of the waiting period for whatever retaliation attack Iran and its regional axis may lead on Israel, against which not only the Americans but also other Western allies and other regional countries in the Middle East are trying to prevent, prepare and contain.
Do you think that attack will just strengthen US government support for Israel?
I think when it comes to security of Israel against attacks by the Shiite countries, and especially Iran, there is quite broad support for Israel. It's a very different discourse than what we hear in terms of the American debate on what Israel does in Gaza. There's a lot of criticism in Washington on Israeli actions in Gaza, but when Iran, Hezbollah, Houthis planning an attack on Israel, that's something that the American political system, I think, is quite united on. And we see that in the willingness of the American military to step up its presence in the region, to convey messages of deterrence, and how this is supported by both sides of the political aisle in the US politics. Although there are definitely some who are trying to link whatever is happening now with efforts toward a ceasefire in Gaza that the American president wants to see progressing, but until now, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Hamas are not really delivering on.
I mean, is it in Netanyahu's interest to have a ceasefire? It would seem that on a personal level, that wouldn't be the case.
I think it's in Israel's interest, and that's something that we see more and more in the Israeli debate. You see the security establishment, you see public opinion, you see the political system, of course, the hostage families. The support for a ceasefire deal in Gaza that will bring back Israeli hostages is now really overwhelming. But until now, the Prime Minister and his far-right coalition partners are not playing along. So Netanyahu has been in Washington just a couple of weeks ago. There were very positive messaging while he was there about prospects for a deal coming near. But in practice, we saw the talks stalling much before even the assassination in Beirut and Tehran. So it's not as if the current escalation prevents a ceasefire. It's more about political will to go the extra mile and reach the deal that is currently missing.
You talked about hostage families, and we know that there were protests in Israel over the weekend by the relatives of the hostages held in Gaza. I wonder how widespread those protests are and if those people support a change in government.
I think the sentiment is widespread. The protest level is less than it used to be like a year ago because the public is so much consumed with the war and its consequences. There is real concern now in Israel about when and how much will an Iranian attack happen and what will be the consequences. And people are still processing all that they lost and went through since October 7. So there is less motivation to actually go to the street, but there is a constant public demand for a deal. And when that public demand is also echoed by other top leaders within the society and the political security establishment, I think that carries weight and that carries a message. Now the Israeli parliament is in recess for the summer until late October. It's a long recess until after the Jewish holidays, so there's no real political pressure on Netanyahu to act. But when it comes to the public domain, definitely Israelis want a hostage return deal. They're willing to end the war for that. And they definitely want early elections that will bring a new leadership after all the failures and crises that Israel has been facing over the last 10 months.
Now, we know that Joe Biden has been in these round-the-clock crisis talks. What have those talks involved and who have they involved?
First, the U.S. is very much committed to try and prevent a spillover of whatever happens between Israel and its neighbors into a regional war. We saw that on October 7. We see that happening in April when there was the previous Iran attack against Israel, and we see that happening now. So it's not only American engagement. We also hear messages coming from the UK and France about willing to support. We heard Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia all conveying messages that they will not enable attacks going to Israel through their airspace and will act against those. So it is quite a big coalition that is willing to block all of that. It's orchestrated by the US. They are taking a leading role. The CENTCOM commander is in Israel. So everything is kind of organizing. The fact that it's taking time, there's a week to prepare, maybe even more, enable this coalition, de facto coalition, to actually be ready to whatever is happening. And that's reassuring Israel and reflects the need for Israel to have strong international partnerships and to act in coherence with international allies.
Do you think that there are diplomatic back channels with Iran?
I think for the Americans, we saw in April during the previous crisis that there were back channels through either European countries, not necessarily European member states, through regional countries in the Middle East that have access to both. We just saw a few days ago the Jordanian foreign minister going to Tehran in a visit that was quite extraordinary. So back channel talks, I guess, happen and exist. We don't know about them publicly, but that's the essence of diplomacy, to take a very brewing crisis and trying to contain it, to minimize it in a way that it basically doesn't jeopardize the interests of those countries involved. Because until now, we saw that neither Israel nor Iran want to have a full-fledged war in the Middle East. The consequences will be very bad.
Now, we know that a barrage of rockets have been fired from Lebanon, but this isn't new, and it's fairly low-level stuff, isn't it?
This is happening on a regular basis since October. It basically leads to tens of thousands of Israelis to be displaced from their communities and homes in the northern part of Israel. This is a big challenge. How do you bring these people back to their communities? How to restore the sense of security? All the diplomatic efforts to reach a Hezbollah-Israel ceasefire were linked to progress towards a ceasefire in Gaza. And when there's nothing happening on the Gaza front, it was difficult until now to reach that deal between Israel and Hezbollah. But I think now that we have sort of a time out of these talks because of the escalation, it's a chance for the mediators to reflect on what has been done until now and maybe look for other modalities in which this crisis could be finally put to an end, because it's going for too long and the price is too high. And the chances for escalation, as we see, are real. And if that eventually happens, there will be a big price to pay.
And when we talk about retaliation, what is it that we imagine would happen? I mean, for instance, how easy would it be for attacks, drone attacks, missile attacks from Lebanon to overcome Israel's Iron Dome air defense system?
It's something that is difficult to predict because until now, the scope of Hezbollah attacks this round was quite well contained by Israel, although there were definitely incidents that were costly. Just a couple of weeks ago, the attack on Majid al-Sham that killed 12 kids from the Druze community, that indicated just how one UAV that goes past the air defense system, how much damage it could lead to. I think the fear is that there will be such a scope of attack coming from different directions at Israel, coordinated by the different proxies of Iran, that will put to a test the Israeli air defense system. And that's where the assistance of the other countries and their military capabilities can step up what Israel can do. In general, the sense in Israel is that Israel is capable of defending itself. It can rely on its systems. There was a proven success in April to block such an Iran attack. And that if Iran doesn't really want to go for a full-fledged war, then whatever will be done could be contained, unless there is real damage to infrastructure, to civilians, or something that crosses red lines, to which Israel will be prepared to quite rapidly strike back, and then the cycle of escalation will continue.
Because, I mean, of course, Netanyahu already says that they're in a multi-front war. We know that the US is deploying more resources to the Middle East. And I just wonder how large the likelihood is of US troops actually being committed, of boots on the ground. Is that going to happen?
I think the US time and time again makes the case that it doesn't want to see more boots on the ground in the Middle East. And I think it's Israeli message to the US for decades that Israel doesn't want to have American soldiers protecting its soil and its interest. Nevertheless, when we are talking about interception of missiles, that doesn't involve boots on the ground. And the capacities that the US has in the region and the military equipment that it has been deploying for that cause, I think enables such an action that will help defend Israel to take place without leading to actual American troops on the ground, something that I think neither side wants to see happen.
Nimrod, just quickly before you go, if one were to predict a timeline on this, or indeed to say it's not going to happen, what would your answer be to that?
I think something will happen because that's the rules of the game in a way. Both Iran and Hezbollah committed to that. We'll see later today a speech by Hassan Nasrallah from Hezbollah that probably will convey similar threats and messaging. The goal will be to contain that. Last time in April, I think it was about 12 days since the incidents that led to eventually to the Iranian retaliation. So we are already talking about a week in the making, maybe a few more days. The expectation is in Israel that it will happen shortly. Trump went yesterday and said it would happen tonight, the past night. It didn't happen. So everybody is anticipating, everybody is awaiting. What we hear from the US media is that the president himself does not know exactly when it will happen. But I guess we are looking at something that will take place within the coming days.
Nimrod Goren, thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist. At a ceremony in Ukraine this weekend, President Volodymyr Zelensky proudly unveiled a series of F-16 fighter jets that are taking to the skies this week, donated by NATO allies after years of asking. Attending the ceremony was Chris Miller, the Financial Times Ukraine correspondent. He spoke to Monocle's Chris Chermak, who began by asking about the mood at the ceremony.
Well, President Volodymyr Zelensky rolled out to this airport near Kiev with all of his top military and security officials, and with great fanfare unveiled the first F-16 fighter jets that had arrived in Kiev. And this was a very specific ask from 2 years ago. You'll recall Volodymyr Zelensky asking the West for significant help in its defense against Russia's invasion. And this was one of the biggest asks and requests from Kiev, to be given these fighter jets to bolster its defenses and replenish its aging Soviet-era Air Force. So this was an exciting day for Kiev because it was, again, 2 years in the works. After lengthy negotiations, Zelensky didn't give us the exact number of jets that are in country, but some of the officials I've spoken with have said up to 10 F-16s are now currently flying in the skies over Ukraine. They expect more to arrive later this year, Zelensky said. And, the mood yesterday, I think, was very positive. Ukraine sort of needed a win. Recently, the Russian forces in the east of the country have been making slow but steady gains. It's faced some significant challenges in terms of manpower and dwindling ammunition. And so, the arrival of these F-16s was a morale boost for Ukraine.
And describe what this means for kind of this week, as you say, from the sense you get is that about 10 F-16s could be in the air. How many more do you expect could be going into the air before the end of this year? And also just in terms of like this week, what exactly will they be doing? How will they be put into operation?
So the numbers game is a little bit tricky, but we do know that maybe double what they have currently will be in the sky by the end of the year. At least that's what they're hoping, with dozens more being provided in 2025. And those are coming from various Western allies. So we don't know the exact timeline yet, but over the next several months, Ukraine will get dozens more F-16s. Now, the big question is how they're going to be used and what really are their capabilities. And what we know is that these are not brand new planes. The West is providing these to Ukraine because these NATO countries want to replenish their own air force, and they're sort of giving away their aging equipment. And these F-16s that are arriving are not equipped with state-of-the-art radars and weapon systems. They are significantly better than Ukraine's aging air force and its Soviet-era MiG jets, for example. They're going to help significantly with defense from Russian missiles and drones, and the Ukrainians have said this explicitly, and Zelensky has said that they will largely be used for defense. And, in recent weeks and months, Russia has targeted key critical infrastructure across Ukraine with long-range missiles and drone strikes. So these will help defend from those. They're not probably going to be used near the front line, or at least not too close to it, because of the proliferation of Russian air defense systems across the front line, as well as Russia's own jets in the skies over eastern Ukraine and over Russia near the borders of Ukraine. So these jets are going to be useful. They are not going to be game changers. And, many people have been very transparent about that. One person in particular I was speaking with in recent days was Andriy Zagorodnyuk, who is the former Ukrainian defense minister, and he runs a security think tank here, and was telling me, these are not silver bullets. They're not going to allow us to win without having hundreds more of them to get up to parity with Russia's air force. But they are going to help. Anything that Ukraine gets at this point is going to help it better defend against Russia's invasion. And so, these are a positive development, certainly. But again, it's assistance. It's not the sort of cure to its much bigger problem.
You described, and kind of the delay in receiving these F-16s is very well documented. But then also, in addition to that, there is this struggle to actually train pilots to fly them. Tell us a little bit about that. Why the delay? I mean, the delay in actually receiving the planes arguably makes more sense, but the training could have been done earlier. Why has there been a delay in training pilots, and where do we go from here on that?
Yeah, there has been a delay in not only sending these here, but also training in pilots. And Ukraine has been very critical of the West in doing so. I haven't really heard a great excuse as to why there has been a delay in training pilots. I think there was some resistance on the part of Ukraine's Western allies because not everyone was on board with sending these jets in the first place. And so they were hesitant to begin training on these jets without having approval of them being sent to Ukraine. The delay is also because the training is time consuming. These are complicated jets that operate with systems that are commanded in a foreign language. Ukrainian pilots are having to learn English to study the manuals for these jets. They're communicating with their trainers in a foreign language, that being English. And so they're having to go to language school as well as flight school to learn how to operate these very complicated NATO jets.
And one other aspect of this, Chris, is you mentioned the long-range attacks from Russia that these F-16s will be trying to prevent. Russia itself has, of course, been trying to prevent the F-16s from getting off the ground by targeting air bases and the like. How successful has that effort been by Russia? And does that in itself, though, perhaps also show that they are at least somewhat worried about these F-16s?
I think Russia has, tried over the course of the war to prevent Ukraine from receiving any assistance from the West, in the F-16s in particular, but really with American Abrams tanks or Bradley fighting vehicles or French Scalp missiles or British Storm Shadow missiles, Russia has employed disinformation campaigns, smear campaigns online, through its own diplomatic channels, as well as through its military means, trying to target these weapons as they come into Ukraine. It has tried to certainly attack them and prevent them from being used on the battlefield against their forces. So I would expect that is going to continue. Obviously, Russia has not been successful in preventing the F-16s from coming into country, just like it has been unsuccessful in preventing some of the other very serious weapons that I mentioned moments ago. And actually, what Russia has done has worked against it. In invading Ukraine, it's actually pushed many countries to join NATO. It has pushed NATO countries to back Ukraine in ways that it never did for the 8 years prior to the full-scale invasion, while there was a war raging in eastern Ukraine. So I think that's an interesting element to all of this, and I would say that this sign of Western support, certainly in Kiev's mind, is one with the delivery of these F-16s that these NATO countries are going to continue backing Ukraine in the foreseeable future.
That was the Kyiv-based journalist Chris Miller speaking with Monocle's Chris Chermak. This is The Globalist, and still to come on the programme, we'll be joining our team in Paris to preview what's coming up at the top of the hour.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 7:22 here in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. It's The Globalist, and joining me in the studio is Zoe Grunewald, who is Westminster editor at The Lead. Good morning to you, Zoe.
Good morning.
It's lovely to have you sitting here across the table from me, looking very summery today. Unfortunately, the story we're starting with is not a jolly one at all. This is all about abuse in Palestinian jails. A big splash in The Guardian today.
Yeah, so The Guardian have done a report with the human rights group B'Tselem, which have said that jails in Israel should now be labelled as torture camps. This is quite a comprehensive piece of research where they interviewed a number of Palestinian prisoners who had been in Israel's jail system and has described abuse ranging from severe beatings and sexual violence to starvations, refusal of medical care, and the deprivation of basic needs. It's a months-long investigation. 55 former prisoners were interviewed. Obviously, it's worth saying that the Israel Prison Service has denied this. They say everything they do is in accordance with human rights law, and the IDF has rejected outright allegations concerning this abuse. But obviously, this raises further questions about Israel's conduct not only during this period of conflict, but also more generally, because further down in the piece, it says that 40% of Palestinian men have been arrested at some point by Israel, which is a pretty kind of sizable statistic, and obviously raises questions about Israel's treatment and whether it can be trusted to act in accordance with international law.
It's very well worth a read, this piece. A lot of detail in there about what's been going on, and as you say, an absolutely comprehensive piece of research there. Let's head to the New York Times now, and really some quite disturbing news when you take this within the context of how much power social media companies have, particularly X, run by Elon Musk.
Yes, so this is a report that basically Elon Musk is planning to move X, formerly Twitter, from California to Texas, which is basically the culmination of a long-standing face-off between Elon Musk and the state where the company of Twitter began. It's quite a change in tone. tone from Musk. Just 1 year ago, he publicly declared that he loves San Francisco and it was the right place for X to be. But now he's moving out. This is in part due to he cited a new California law banning school transgender notification requirements as his reason for leaving. He made a series of furious tweets about it a couple of weeks ago. But it's a real blow to the Golden State because they've seen an exodus of tech companies in the last few years, and obviously it raises questions about what it is that San Francisco will be, whether it will still have that dominance kind of over tech in the US, and whether other tech companies will follow suit.
And it's very personal for Musk. He has a transgender child, but it also is indicative of how much he can try and force states to change policy to fall in line with his own personal views. Let's go to Britain now, and really very alarming headlines, though if you live in London you wouldn't know that this was going on.
Yeah, so London seems quiet. I mean, it's August. I was really noted how quiet it was on the roads yesterday. It's sunny, bright, but across the rest of the country there has been real periods of unrest, rioting from these far-right protesters who've basically this all exploded after there was this brutal murder of these 3 young girls a couple of weeks ago, and there has been an outpouring of violence across the country from far-right rioters. They've been looting, torching communities, attacking people of colour. Yesterday, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer had his first Cobra meeting of his government to discuss the violence. Obviously, Cobra meeting is one of the emergency meetings that the government undertakes, and has basically said he's going to put together a sort of army of police officers. This isn't deploying the army, it's important to note that, but this army of police officers who can basically respond to the violence as it continues into the week. They're also going to have courts sitting late into the night. They're already arresting people. I think 400 people have been arrested so far, but this violence is expected to keep going. More riots and protests have been planned, so it's very, it's pretty tense here in the UK at the minute.
And we can link that back, of course, to Twitter, because the reason the riots kicked off was some completely false information about the perpetrator of the stabbing of those young girls, and it was said that it was a Muslim recent migrant who was on the watch list, the Secret Service watch list. This was completely untrue. It was done by a man who was born in Cardiff in Wales. 17 years old. He's now been arrested. I am so glad we're going to do this next story. Now, you've got to talk us through very carefully about the bear.
This is a very eyebrow-raising headline. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Has basically admitted in this bizarre story that he left the carcass of a bear cub in Central Park a decade ago. And this has been a mystery that's long kind of been in the New York lexicon of this bear cub that was found by a woman in Central Park. And now RFK has admitted that it was him. And he said a woman in front of him, when he was driving down the street a while out of New York, hit the bear cub. And he decided to take the bear cub because he was going to skin it and harvest its meat. At some point, he ended up having dinner with a group of friends. The bear cub was still in the boot of his car. He didn't know what to do with it, and they all decided to go and that he should go and put the bear cub in Central Park and stage a cycling accident with it. It's just so bizarre. Basically, this story was going to come out, and he tried to get ahead of it with an interview. But it raises, all it does is raise more questions, because the story doesn't really add up. It's a bit bizarre. So
and he says all his friends were drunk, but of course he wasn't.
Yes, which
and the other bizarre thing is that it came out in an interview with Roseanne Barr.
Yes, who isn't the sort of friendly kind of face that everyone remembers from many years ago. She's become very kind of conspiratorial, really, I think it's fair to say. And it's just, the whole thing is bizarre, but I think in some way it does encapsulate some parts of American politics quite well, which is that there's often so much surprise and strange things that come out. It really makes the UK politics look quite boring sometimes.
But in terms of Robert Kennedy, his family have disavowed him. He's got some very, very wacky views.
Yes, he does. He's been extremely vocal about the vaccine and the coronavirus pandemic, and how he doesn't believe that was, totally kind of above board. But yeah, absolutely, he is, it's fair to say, very conspiratorial. He initially launched his campaign as a Democrat, then switched to run as an independent. And you really get the sense with this story that there may be other similar wacky stories about RFK to come out.
Absolutely, but that one is
particularly strange.
But at least New York has solved the mystery, right? Because you're absolutely correct in that for the past decade, people have been wondering.
Yeah, because black bears aren't kept in Central Park Zoo. They're not native to the park. I mean, it was all very, very strange for the people in New York.
Zoe, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's Zoe Grunwald there. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has narrowed her search for a vice presidential running mate to 2 finalists, Governors Tim Walz of Minnesota and Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. Harris is expected to announce her selection today ahead of her first scheduled public appearance with her running mate tonight at Temple University in Philadelphia. Venezuela is launching a criminal probe against the opposition leaders contesting last month's election for inciting police and military officials to break the law, the country's top prosecutor said, as security forces targeted people they say committed violent crimes during election protests. The announcement followed a letter posted on social network X by opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez and leader Maria Corina Machado, calling for security forces to stand by the people and respect the results of the election they say they won. And in Britain, protests, mostly involving a few hundred people, have continued across the country, with shops looted and mosques and Asian-owned businesses attacked. Cars have been set on fire and some unverified videos on social media have shown ethnic minorities being beaten up. Australia and Nigeria are among countries to issue warnings yesterday to citizens resident in or travelling to Britain. Last night, protests spread to Plymouth in southwest England. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, yesterday, Sheikh Hasina, who was the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, caved to weeks of popular protests and resigned, fleeing the country. The 76-year-old has ruled the South Asian nation of 170 million with an iron fist since 2009. She won a 4th term in office in January in an election that was boycotted by the opposition. Joining me now, we have Redwan Ahmed. Redwan, many thanks for coming on the line here. Just this weekend, it would have been unthinkable that Sheikh Hasina would leave. She ordered a brutal crackdown on the protesters and as many as 200 people died, with many thousands arrested. So what turned the tide?
Thanks, Georgina, for having me. And, as you rightly said, even yesterday morning, I could not anticipate this would happen so soon. So what we are hearing from our sources on the ground and what we have experienced with the officials and all. So when things turned really bad on Sunday, and when nearly 100 of people lost lives, and among them there was protesters and also there were police, and there was also people from government forces like government parties like Awami League who lost lives. So things went really out of control. And now we hear one of her advisors, even some top rank and file members of the Awami League, they started advising her to maybe hand over power to the army, to the military. But she was still very adamant to hold on to cling on to the power until the very last moment and she received intelligence that, people have broke out to the street, they have broke down the curfew, and they are marching towards, thousands are marching towards her residence, in a way to topple her. So that's very last minute. She decided to tender her resignation, and she said she wanted to record a video address for the citizens, but she didn't have time. She had to hurry she flew to India on a military helicopter from her residence.
So Bangladesh's army has a history of staging coups and counter-coups. What was the army role in this?
So, that was also a very contested idea here. That when she decided to deploy military on the streets, when she imposed a curfew, so there was already some talks and some tensions that this might be a way that army could take over, and literally she made all the grounds and eventually, it was the army who took over. And, this is a very difficult time right now. But as her government herself, they had abolished the system to bring in a caretaker government lawfully. They have, through a parliamentary vote, they have abolished that system that we had, like caretaker government or interim government. So there are only handful ways left to transition of power. So eventually, army had to, intervene, and then the army military chief who spoke to the media and said they are taking charge, and they will also take charge to create an interim government to lead the country forward.
So, what do the people want? And are the streets clear now? Are they still out there?
So things are still pretty volatile, pretty fluid. We're getting news of some vandalism, as you said, like some unconfirmed videos of temples coming under attack. There are mass attacks on police stations across the country. Angry mob have attacked on the houses of Awami League leaders. So things are still quite tense, but it is slightly going back to normalcy again. Well, the offices have resumed, and there's an attempt to bring back to restore normalcy. But no one wants silence. Even the ordinary people, the students who led this protest to eventually to oust the Sheikh Hasina government. So they have come up with a formula to form this interim government, which will eventually hand over power to a democratically elected government. And the students have proposed the Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus to lead this interim government. And as my sources confirm, the Muhammad Yunus has accepted the invitation from the students, but we are still unsure whether he was approached by the military or the president yet.
So do the military and the president agree with what the students want? Do they want Muhammad Yunus there? As you said, he's won the Nobel Prize. He's a very famous microfinancer. And in fact, if people want to know more about him, there is an interview with him in our archives on Meet the Writers. But tell us, is he just the people's choice, or is he the official choice?
Right now, he is the people's choice. So people are very jubilant when they heard the news that the student leaders have proposed his name. But we still haven't heard any official confirmation that whether he was approached by the president or the military. So this is still on the air. But yeah, it's pretty much like people's choice. There is a unified and people, the citizens, the concerned citizens, they're very willing to have him on this government.
And is there enough credible opposition who could support him?
So that is one problem here. In the past 15 years of Sheikh Hasina's rule, she has pretty much very strong-handedly, crushed any effective opposition. There is this Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and their leader, Begum Khaleda Zia, she's very ill. She's mostly in the hospitals, and one of her son, Tariq Zia, is in exile in London. There's lack of enough effective political opposition, and so it might be that we're heading towards a deep political crisis in the coming days.
And just finally, can the army be trusted? Will they hand over to an interim government? Will there be free and fair elections? How do the people there in Bangladesh feel about that?
The people in the Bangladesh, ordinary people, they don't feel really good about any army regime, and especially the history does not, give them hope. In the latest was in 2008, when on similar situation, the army took over, and then they formed the interim government that lasted for two years before handing over power to Awami League. And they have seen what these 2 years have been like and what it had created a monster like Sheikh Hasina. So people are not really feeling really comfortable under this army regime. And I think the army is also trying to balance between, they did not announce any emergency. They said they're talking with the representatives of the political parties. They also want a peaceful solution. So, we are skeptical. People are skeptical, but we just have to see how it unfolds from now.
Redwan, thank you very much indeed. That's Redwan Ahmed there. And you're with Monocle Radio. It's 15:39 in Tokyo, 8:39 in Zurich, and it's time to talk trade and economy news with Vicky Price, economist and former joint head of the UK government's Economic Service, who joins us on the line now. Vicky, what a volatile period we've been living through these last few days. Do tell us more about this massive sell-off and the panic amongst stock traders on Monday.
Yes, well, it all started last week, of course, because we saw, in fact, on Friday, some weaker labour market news coming out of the US, which spooked the markets a little bit and started a concern about what was going to happen to the UK more generally, but the same to the US more generally, and then to the rest of the world if indeed the US were to move into recession. Concerns about high interest rates, perhaps, stopping the economy from performing as it should, and also the case elsewhere. But at the same time, we had Japan raising their interest rates as well for the second time. They hadn't moved interest rates for decades, and yet they did, mainly because they were worried about a weak yen, and also, of course, inflation has been picking up finally in Japan. You would have thought that was good news because Japan has been trying to get above zero for ages, and finally it's managing it at around sort of 3%, 3.5%. And that, of course, led to a reaction with that increase in interest rates, even though the interest rates there have only gone up to 0.25%. It's extraordinary, really. But they did have an impact on the yen. And there were two issues that then happened. Two concerns, first of all, about the growth of the Japanese economy, which had done sort of okay in 2023, about, growing by just under 2%, but it's forecast to do less than 1% this year. So there were concerns that perhaps it would move back into a situation of really very low growth, as it has done for a long period of time. And the other thing is that, of course, loads of hedge funds and others have tended to borrow in currencies where, interest rates are low, as they have been in Japan, and then invest in places where they can make an awful lot more, like in the US. And they were trying to unwind some of those positions they were in, and that, of course, brought a drop in markets worldwide. So there was a combination of things going on, and Monday then culminated in even more falls, with also in Europe seeing declines across the board of about 2%, in the UK 2%, some recovery towards the end of the day. And then finally, once it's been realized that some of these issues were technical and the US wasn't doing that badly after all, things have improved, and we saw stock markets in Japan going up by 10%, Asian markets generally increasing again overnight, and the expectations are that when Europe opens, things will start improving there as well. So maybe it's a short-lived thing, but actually there are some underlying issues, and those are, what do we do with the world economy? Are interest rates too high, and do they need to come down?
Vicky, let's turn our gaze here to Britain, because as we've been reporting, of course, there's been unrest in many towns, mostly in the north of the country and also the southwest, Plymouth last night. What's the cost of that on UK high streets?
Well, it's interesting because we've just been talking about growth, and of course in the UK there have been some growth upgrades. So we now expect growth of over 1% in 2024, whereas the Bank of England just a few months ago thought that there would only be 0.5%. So they've revised that to 1.25%. So that was good news. So a lot of optimism. Interest rates started coming down and so on. But this a series of events on high streets and towns, not all of it right in the centre, of course, because there have been some attacks on hotels supposedly having asylum seekers in them, which are out of town ones, or at least not centre of town ones. But overall, the result of that has been quite a lot of destruction and real concerns all across the country as to what's going to happen to the high streets next, which have been suffering anyway. And there's been this big move to level up, the rest of the UK, given that it's London that does usually rather well and the others sort of suffer a little bit. But this is going to give quite a blow to that. I mean, the cost could be in hundreds of millions anyway to just restore what's been damaged, and then of course do you want to go back to a high street where there are risks involved? So the cost could be significant, and lots of firms we've been hearing are just not going to open up again, and that will require obviously a lot more effort if we are to rebuild the centre of towns, which have been suffering in the last few years. So it's not good news from an economic viewpoint, let alone from a from an optics viewpoint, I mean, quite a lot of countries are already saying don't visit the UK, it's dangerous, and particularly if you come from a Muslim country. So not good news all round, really.
Let's have a look at this story about Google breaking the law with its monopoly over online searches. That's what US federal judges have said. And of course, that could have a significant influence over one of America's biggest tech companies.
Yes, I mean, this ruling seems to be, a real triumph for the Justice Department, which has been sort of looking to do something about this for decades. And it started, of course, during the Trump presidency, I think about 4 years ago, just over that, and continued through the sort of Biden administration. And it's taken quite some time, and it's all about the search engine, as you rightly say. I mean, just to remember that this search engine is sort of, or handles, if you want to call it that, or deals with some of the, 90% of all the internet searches that are taking place across the world. So Google has a bit of a monopoly. It's trying to, or has tried, this is the alleged violation of monopoly rules, to exclude other competitors, paying companies to use them rather than anyone else. And, that is considered to be violating all the rules. But that, as I said, has taken some time, and Google is going to appeal. So, what's going to happen? I mean, the owner, of course, is Alphabet, and they certainly intend to go through this themselves over the next few years through, contesting the actual judgment. So it's going to take some time, but it's a general move that's been taking place against quite a lot of the tech companies and exercising some monopoly power, in various elements of what they do. We've seen that happening, of course, in Europe as well, quite extensively. Fines imposed and then taking ages for those to have an impact, or even finally, being paid. So yes, it looks like a big victory, but what the outcome will be is still very unclear.
And Vicky, if there is a change in administration in the US, I mean, Trump is really quite keen on keeping the monopolies. So clearly, we're seeing already Elon Musk supporting the Republican cause. Could we see a great deal of money and support from the tech bros from Silicon Valley pushing their weight behind Trump simply because they want to hang on to their monopolies?
Yes, we could see that. And of course, it all depends how much money they've still got, because I know we've seen a number of the stock prices of firms going down quite significantly over the last few days, and also some of the results coming out of some of the tech companies haven't been particularly great recently. But yes, I think you're right. There's going to be, the lobbying has been going on for ages anyway. We do know full well that all these big firms, spend a lot of money lobbying and supporting particular if you like, politicians who may, I'm not talking with any evidence of exactly how much is being spent, but it wouldn't be terribly surprising what you're saying. In other words, that there could be a change in attitude if there's also a change in terms of who is the. Well, there will be a change in terms of who is the president, but in terms of whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans who are in power after the elections in November.
And these people own our data. Vicky, thank you very much indeed. That's Vicky Price there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Now, Well, there's a new player stepping up to compete in the busy London art scene. Founded by Kim, Lockheed's Prince, and her husband Lionel, Moco Museum has been quick to attract a diverse set of eyes to its modern and contemporary exhibits across its two existing locations in Amsterdam and Barcelona. Well, Monocle's Gunnar Grunlid spoke to Kim and began by asking how Moco originally came to be.
My husband and I are in art for 25 years. We started with a gallery. And then we traveled the world and saw so many nice art on art fairs in Miami, Art Basel, but never all that what we liked in a museum. So we started selling in our gallery, and then so many young people came, always, like 1,000 people a day, mothers with 15 years old, children that told their mom to go with the train for an hour to see this art. So the moms were totally excited. Then one day we decided to take a big leap of faith and open a museum, and it's been busy since day one.
And what's sort of your overall curatorial style at Moco compared to other places?
Yeah, I think it is our own taste. So it is what we like. So normally in a museum you get every year maybe or every 10 years a new director or curator. It's really our own taste, and I think it's starting from the 50s. My husband is a little bit more modern, I'm more contemporary, and I think we've tried to find pieces that are vibrant, that have a message. Some pieces have a strong message but are not so easy or beautiful to look at, so we try to find a combination. And we really think of the visitor, so in 45 minutes or 1 hour or 1 hour and a half, as long as you stay, you see like a complete version, in our opinion, from what we think that you need to see if you see a Warhol, Basquiat, a Banksy, a JR, and new emerging artists that maybe have a strong message.
And then how come you decided that you wanted to have a space in London as well? I mean, of course, the gallery world in London is already very competitive, but you've seen your success in your other locations. What made you want to decide to move to London?
Yeah, for us it's always just a feeling, but it's also that 30% of our visitors, both in Amsterdam and in Barcelona, are from the UK. So, well, it was safe to say that they like us. And and we really, really, really like London. So it's also, our children are still, our youngest is 17, so it's not the right time yet to do something abroad with jet lags and everything. And we wanted to try in Europe, and I think the biggest challenge is in London. It's like the art capital, so we know many people there. So it's like a big challenge for us, and to see if we can make it here.
You guys seem to be focusing quite a lot on drawing in younger audiences as well. Do you think that appreciation and engagement with modern art among young people has changed a lot since you guys started this?
Yeah, I think so. It was never the purpose, because when we started, I was like, the museum, I was 42 or something. So I was over 40, and it was just my own taste. And but I do think that it started with this, and that people just seem to like it. And I'm very happy that I do. I think I kind of have an eye for what's trending, and I see so many fashion brands and DJs collaborating with visual artists. So I also want to show that. So I think it's like the last thing that I know so many young people who know the head designer of Gucci, but they don't know who Kusama is. So it's very nice to help in this education, and maybe we know that some people don't know that, and other musea, I don't know, maybe think different. But I'm happy to educate, like the total package, like this is a step into the art world.
And in the contemporary art scene now, just finally, are there any particular sort of movements of art or particular artists or things that people are experimenting with that excite you the most and that you're excited to show people in this new London gallery?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of our new artists, and I think there's also, as a movement, you saw that in way back in traditional art, people draw what they saw, and maybe 30 years ago people were a little bit more, and 20 years ago people were a little bit more angry as artists, like pushing the establishment and saying this is wrong with society. And what I feel now is that artists seem to give kind of solutions or new way of thinking in art. And that I can see that people get inspired.
That was Kim Lockie's Prince speaking with Monocle's Gunnar Grinlund. Now, Moco's new London location opens in Marble Arch on Saturday. This is The Globalist. Now, of course, at 8 o'clock, what happens, that's London time and that's 9 in Paris. What happens is we head to our Paris studios. What I've actually got is somebody who's come back from our Paris studios, and that's Vincent McAviney. Now, Vinny, you were there all last week, and I also have to say that our engineer here today, who is Steph Chungu, was there last week. She came back telling tales, I have to say. She said you and Emma and Andrew Muller are all having way too good of a time.
Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. I have to say, I've started to think, LA 2028, is that somewhere that I'll be heading to for the next one? Because it was a great atmosphere. I think, like we saw in London, you spend years of time hearing about it, and there is a slight focus on the negative in the media. And it was really interesting that an interview with the French sports minister I heard last week, she said, whenever it got tough, I remembered the words of Lord Seb Coe, former athlete who then ran the London Games, who said, when it comes, everyone will get on board and everyone will forget the years of trouble that led up to it.
Yeah.
And I think that definitely is the case with Paris.
Well, I'm going to allow Emma Nelson right of reply there. Emma, Steph Chungu says you've been having way too much fun.
Oh, well, I don't know what fun means. It's hard work, I must confess, but it's hard work of the most satisfying and beautiful kind. I think when you have possibly the world's most beautiful office to work in, by which I mean the whole of the city of Paris, it is one of those things that a challenge actually becomes a little bit of a pleasure. And what we've really enjoyed in the last few days is examining the other areas of Paris apart from the sports that we've been bringing to you. And today we have something that Monocle is incredibly passionate about. We've got Marie-Pierre Lalonde, who's editor-in-chief of M. Le Monde's Friday magazine. She's going to come in and she's going to talk about how the press cover all this and how the benefits of the long read and the magazine. And also we'll talk about the future of print in France, which for so long has been held up as an absolute bastion of how to do it. We'll see how strong the world of the press is maintaining. So that's one thing that we're very, very keen to talk about today.
And you'll also be unpicking the creative side of Paris.
Yes, we have a little bit about Paris hotels, which is great. The news has come out this morning saying that there's high occupancy in hotels for the first time in months and months and months. So we now have this springboard for all the wonderful visitors who are coming. And we're going to be talking to a man who is who's taking Vogue. You and I all remember that. I don't know if I've ever see you Vogue, Georgina, but when I get back...
What, like Madonna, you mean?
Like Madonna.
Right.
Just like Madonna. We're going to be voguing like Madonna on the 16th floor of Maison Alliance from 9 a.m. Paris time. We're going to be
a bit early for voguing.
It's never too early. If you can look, if you're as limber as you and I, and as bendy and flexible, then frankly, any time is a good time for voguing. We can do a 24-hour vogue-a-thon if you fancy.
Do you know what, Emma? I really don't.
Well, whether we do or not, I think it's immaterial. It's whether the rest of the world needs it.
Right. Well,
I suspect that my voguing ship has sailed.
We'll be hearing much more about that in just a couple of minutes' time. Emma Nelson, thank you very much indeed. And that's all we've got time for on today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Chris Chermak and Monica Lillis, our researcher, Sana Jimani, and our studio manager, Steph Chungu, with editing assistance from Mariella Bevan. Now, as we said, coming up at the top of the hour, we're going to cross to Monocle in Paris. If you're brave enough, if you can put aside for a minute the thought of Emma Nelson and possibly I voguing, because I will be listening and of course voguing along with her, then that's one for you. The briefing is live at midday in London. The Daily will come from Paris and The Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.